Hi there, I'm Dani Henderson. Welcome back to my beautiful channel. Today it is June the 4th, maybe the 5th. My guest, he's here again, our resident astrologer, the one, the only, George H. Lewis, currently in Florence. But if you're in Italy, it's called Firenze. George H. Lewis, mwah! How are you, my love?
I'm really well. It's very nice to see you after quite a long pause. I've had a really great time traveling around Europe and really seeing what's going on the European side of the Atlantic, actually, getting a sense of where people are in their awakening process. It's been quite revelatory for me, actually.
What do you see, George, as somebody who's aware of all the systems crumbling down and you're on your own path with your academy and teaching around the world? What do you think the pulse point is currently, the temperature of people who are aware of the scummery that's occurred across our planet?
Well, I think what's really interesting is, as a European, we're both Europeans, obviously Brits, and I've always had this constantly since the timeline change of 2016, 2017, but Europeans saying to me, gosh, how do you do it, George? Why do you live in America? It's so polarized, it's so angry, it's so intense. Come back to Europe. And you see what's really happened, and I'm obviously generalizing to get the ball over the net, is the Americans have been going through the nuts and bolts of the awakening for many years now. And it's been painful, it's been traumatic. And Europeans, they're going through it, but much slower. Because the civilization's older, because the coffee's better, the food's better, the water's better, there's a little bit of a complacency. But there's also massive poverty here too. It's not all shiny. I mean, this is a world event. This is a world opportunity for us to step into this new potentiality as a human being. And I think with Europeans, it's going to take a little longer. Because I think a lot of people, they're not discussing it en masse in the same way. I'm not saying everyone in the United States discussing it en masse. Of course, there's still people who are very much asleep. But the tension is there, it's breaking it down. The system, that uranium system in the United States is being activated. And there's obviously a figurehead where people are focusing on change in the United States. Whatever people think of the Orange Man, he is a figurehead for something new. That doesn't exist in Europe in the same way. A few bits and pieces in Italy and a few individuals, but nothing significant. So I think it's going to take a little bit longer, but the coffee's better.
Well, that's all right then. That's the compliment. Oh my goodness. Well, George, one of your expertise is definitely astrology. So could you give us the nuts and bolts and down belows and upsy downsies of June, sir?
Yeah, well, I think what's really interesting, we had the solar eclipse in Taurus, and we had the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. Taurus is fixed Earth. We've had some pretty heavy duty stuff on a sort of Earth-based level in the last, month and a half. And suddenly everything's moved into Gemini. We have a massive stellium of planets in Gemini. What that means is coming up now with the new moon, Sun and Moon in Gemini, conjunct Venus, conjunct Mercury and Jupiter. All there in Gemini. Gemini, the planet of communication, of new beginnings, of information sharing, is being activated. So I think we're going to see, in that sense, a lot more disclosure coming in, communication about new ideas coming in. We're also seeing some of these planets being activated, like, for example, Pluto is being activated at 1-2 degrees Aquarius, and that's making a nice trine with Jupiter now at 1-2 degrees Gemini. And when we have a trine, it's a positive commitment to, in this case, disclosure, sense of the old systems being torn down and something positive is coming in its place. So Gemini is very much, I would say, for example, a lot of conversations to do with technology coming in. We're seeing a lot of conversations to do with exploration, new encounters, even languages. Gemini rules languages because it's ruled by Mercury. Barriers are being broken down. There are these new apps where you can translate automatically any language into another language instantaneously. And this is now becoming more available to the public. And I also think there's stuff like, when it comes to things like travel, with this all these planets in Gemini, we're seeing, like conversations around autonomous cars coming out. I mean, I can't remember which company is doing it, but they're a bit like drones. And if you think about them in the movies, you get into them and they hover and they take off. I mean, as Jupiter's in Gemini for the next year, I think we're going to see much more conversations around new technologies coming into travel. So that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, I saw on Facebook the other day a friend was filming getting picked up in a driverless car with two other people, and it was just weird as anything. The front seatbelt was belted. Obviously, there's no one there. And it was a very uneasy thing being in the car with her through her video and just, observing this. I'm not quite sure what the point is. It's like going to Sainsbury's or Vons or Rouse, the shopping grocery store, and there's just one human person with a long line of mostly elderly people doing their shop, but they're expected to do the little whiz through. But we don't work there. We want people. We want human interaction. The retardos that created these systems of non-interaction, us doing the work, they're so devoid. I can't understand how such stupidity and lack of being in touch with humanity. We are a loving, feeling, giving race. We need people. We need to communicate. We need to feel energy. We need to just a look in someone's eyes is enough for someone to light up in some way, some connection. And it's becoming so devoid, the world, machinization, machinery, whatever phrase you want to say. There are so many ways to describe that particular juncture that we appear to be at. But humanity must use their voice,
Yeah.
and the person I was with in the grocery store had such a big pile in the trolley. I'm like, I can't be asked to stand and scan when, I, like a lot of people, my energy frequency just shuts things down all the time. They have to stand with me while I'm bagging stuff. You know what I mean? The times I have gone through I'm not the only one. Plus, I really don't want to be doing that anyway. I want to speak to the lovely old men, So to your point, again, about the balance of the Gemini, the flood of information, the connection, the push that we've seen to make us all soulless, non-communicative, which is obviously failing. I mean, what more can you say to that?
I mean, I think the thing is, with like everything, we've really seen the ones who are awake, a huge inversion of the good things into the dark things. So in a way, the highest expression of the Gemini archetype is to allow communication to come in to support the biological, as you say, to support the actual human biological entity that is us, the people, as opposed to subvert it and to make it transhuman. And it's interesting, it does coincide that we've got something called a Cassini conjunction. When Venus and the sun come together, exactly, it's called a Cassini conjunction. And this is when Venus plunges into the heart of the sun. And it signifies the end of one synodic cycle for Venus and the beginning of a new one. And I'm very fascinated with the cycles of Venus, because Venus is all about our genesis. It's all about gestation. It's those Venusian qualities, of something being seeded, something being born that will be new. So I always want people to think, well, where's Gemini in your chart? If it's in your 10th house, it's going to affect your career undoubtedly in the next month and actually over the coming year, because we've got big planets which will last a long time in Gemini. And the synodic cycle of Venus is important because they're these lovely cycles of to do with the balance in a way between the masculine and feminine. And it's a time when new beginnings can really start, especially when it comes to relationships. And so maybe this is a time for humans to pull back away from the technologies in the sense of becoming aware of the negative inverted side of technologies and to pull them back to try and get them to support what the people need. You see, when technology is used beneficently, when technology is used to support the human, it's benevolent, it's kind. We've just had crazy, almost death cult people creating algorithms and technology that are anti-human. And that is just truth. And so part of the spiritual journey that we're on in this awakening is to have these entities, these programs positioned in a way that support the people, support our growth, if you like, the law of consistency, support our evolutionary process, and they are innately spiritual. You see, it is hermetic at the end of the day. And I think with these Venus conjunctions, these Gsic conjunctions, and the synodic cycles that we're in, we have to go back to that hermetic principles, as above, so below, so within, so without, because that's how we understand that we are, as a soul in a human body, we're both, and we have to get that relationship going. And it's whether it's the relationship with ourself, with our higher self, with our partners, with our children, our family, our friends, with the stranger. When we raise that spiritual frequency, then something huge changes on our planet. And I think part of this Gemini is having the conversations around that at this time.
Incredible. Now, clearly, I am not an expert in astrology, my darling. That is why you are the resident astrologer on this channel, George H. Lewis, and your beautiful academy. Now, you mentioned something. You said Venus plunges into the heart of the sun. Pray tell, what does this mean?
The Gsic is a word where the sun and a planet come together in an exact conjunction. I mean, literally, it's Latin for relating to and involving the conjunction of a star or a planet or any celestial object with another one. But this particular one is to do, it's Greek, it's synodicus. And it relates to this conjunction to the period when two successive conjunctions of the same celestial bodies, such as the moon and the sun, or in this case, the sun and Venus, come together, and it activates the power of Venus and the sun. So the sun and Venus become even stronger at this exact point in time. Now, don't forget, Venus is very beneficent. It's one of the great benefic. It's actually the lesser benefic, Jupiter being the greater benefic. Doesn't mean it's less important. It relates more to our personal journey. You know, have a look. If people know one's astrology, look to see where your Venus is. Look to see, most importantly, where Gemini is in your chart. If it's in your first house, it's going to really have a shift in how you're seen in the world and how you project yourself out in the world. If it's in the second house, it will be to do with resources, a change in resources, seventh house relationships, and so on. And so the Gsic conjunction just allows it to be activated that much more. And those Venusian qualities are born. And in some ways, it's that feminine archetype. I mean, it's interesting. Literally, when we had this conjunction, we've now got a couple of ladies running for office in Mexico. And there are these opportunities when the feminine can maybe come out a little bit stronger and balance that. Again, back to the Gemini. Gemini, when it is successful, is the balance. It's the magician card between the masculine and the feminine. And whether that plays out on a physical level between male and female, or internally between our, if you like, our rational and our imaginative part of our nature, you know, the lunar, the solar, everything. And this is where the Hermetic tradition is so powerful. It's something I love to teach because I love to learn it, is finding that balance between the two polarities is when we have a much more engaged and conscious public. And we operate at a higher, more integrated frequency as a consequence, as opposed to working solely from the lower three chakras.
Incredible. Taking a step back a moment into how we were kind of, you know, presenting the mechanization of systems, and not sitting and waiting to speak to the lovely elderly person, for example, and do your shopping and have that little chat, as the Brits do, don't we? We take forever to say hello and goodbye. Bye then, see you later. All right, love you. In America, it's okay, bye, click. They just do that. Okay, bye. Anyway, you know, we gotta pick, you know, pick what's going to serve us. So the other day I went to the gym because I want to try every single class. I don't care what it is, I'm trying it. Well, this class was called Cyclone, and it was stationary bikes. What I didn't know, but I found out rather quickly, that the class was full of nothing below a triathlete. There were the most well-built men and women on these bikes, okay? So of course I'm right at the front, because you have to book the bike or get the bike you're booked on. Everyone's got a disc on screen, so everyone can see how fast someone's pedaling, you know, and what their rate is. So during the course of this horrible event, I'm like, I think I'm a bit out of my league here, and I'm very competitive, but I'm not silly. Anyway, I don't know how it's possible, but at one point I fell off the stationary bike, right? It was like being in a room, an enclosed pen with alpha males and females, heads down, pedaling like faster than the witch from the Wizard of Oz. I mean, it was insane. And I think it's when I look round at the nonsense and the high frequency energy that's when I fell off my bike, got back on, and then I twisted my ankle because my foot got caught in the stirrupy thing. And I'm like, what am I doing? I was just trying to have a go, you know? And then I look at the discs on the screen. Everyone's number is digitized, their pulse, their heart rate, everything, right? It's like proper, you know, Olympian style athletes, right? And everyone's like 185, 235. And I'm over here like, Dani, 15%.
Well, Dani, it's like a British comedy. I mean, but it's also, it shows your bravery for going into a situation like that. Most people wouldn't do that, you see, and I honor you. I think it's brilliant.
I am brave. It's funny though, when I left, a semi-handsome man beside me, he said, "Are you coming back?" And I said, "No." I'm like, tick. I walked for 3 days. I was paralyzed from the tummy down. For days. I'm still not quite fully recovered, George H. Lewis. I'm not.
Well, I mean, you're definitely, you know, leaning into the Mars in Aries, which we still have for a few more days, that powerful expression of physicality, of trying, you know, to keep the physical strong. I mean, I think in some ways we all have to do our version of that. I mean, part of the journey for all of us is honoring the temple. And, you know, we can't just be mentally strong. We have to be physically strong. And strong means supple as well. It doesn't mean necessarily big, you know, exaggerated muscles, but we have to honor the temple. It's mind, body, spirit, isn't it? I mean, in some ways, that's what the Gemini is asking us to do, is to get that balance of communication. So the body is activated like the brain is activated, like the heart is activated.
How much do you think, George, that somebody who is a birth sign of Gemini and others who have Gemini rising, and I've never understood all that part because I haven't studied it like you have, how much do you think a person born on the Gemini month, or those 3-4 weeks, is fully affected by the Gemini movement as opposed to those with a rising or a sun or a moon in Gemini?
So what I would say is the more planets you have in one signature zodiac sign, the more that archetypal truth is going to be more manifest. So for example, let's say someone has a sun and moon, say with Venus in Gemini, and it's in the first house. It's such a strong potency of that person is just not going to put on weight, because Gemini is life. It's ruled by Mercury. Just go back to the myth. Mercury's strong, but he's sinewy, he moves fast. And, you know, where, for example, someone had, say, Jupiter in Taurus on the ascendant, Taurus being fixed earth, Jupiter being expansion, one of the archetypal, not the only one, but one of the archetypal truths of that is that person's more likely to put on weight. And I mean, I'm very fascinated by medical astrology, and I do it quite a lot when I'm reading for people. And it's just a question of really understanding where our strengths and weaknesses are. And it's not even a question of strengths and weaknesses, it's where our archetypal tendencies are. And once we have that information, then we can sort of prepare and plan and actually be freer, because we know that, okay, Saturn's in that sign, which actually Saturn on the ascendant means you're going to be thinner, where Jupiter is the opposite, you're going to expand. And of course, it doesn't mean always just physically, it could be in the sense of the way you are when you interact. So to answer your question, people with a strong Gemini thread, you know, it's a masculine sign, it's a yang sign, tend to be on the slimmer side, where of course the sign before it, Taurus, is more fixed earth. And you think about it, it's not that everyone is big as a Taurus, but there is a strength, there's more of a solidity if you think of the myth, the bull, as opposed to the twins, the Dioscuri, the Castor and Pollux, and there's a sense of, you know, greater movability when it comes to the Gemini archetype, where Taurus is more fixed. And of course, both have a positive and a negative interpretation, depending on, you know, whether you're leaning more towards the light or the dark. I mean, every single sign has a most beautiful Christ-like expression, and also a mostly a deeply demonic one, depending on how it's going to be made manifest in the human experience.
Ah, beautiful. Let's talk a little bit about where you are in the world. In Florence, most of us across the world, call it Florence. The Italians do not call it Florence, they call it Firenze, which is Firenze. Note to the viewers out there. I was in Florence one year with my mum. I took her as a treat for her birthday. And we were on the train from Florence to Pisa to go and see the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which isn't that far away. But on the way back from Pisa, we get on the train, we're asking the conductor of Florence, no one's told us yet, we're still ignorant to the fact that it's not called Florence. I'm on the train looking at all the stations, what they're called, in absolute panic in a foreign country. We don't speak Italian, and I cannot see the word Florence. I cannot see. Finally, someone told us the reality. So I don't want anyone else to make that error. It's awful. It's scary. We got it sorted out. And then when I was in Florence too, I booked this lovely hotel. It had like a castle tower at the top. And I took my mother up there to watch the sunset and have a glass of wine or whatever. And then we got locked in.
Wow.
They locked the bloody door. Yeah, I had to holler for ages into the lift, into the elevator, like, help, help. I just know the Italian word for help. I just the English one. But anyway, while I was in Florence with my mum, we had the most incredible time. There was a man, there's a square, and they've got all mock-ups of the great David, Michelangelo's David, and there's mocks, not the real ones. This man's telling us, you don't need to see the real David. He's here, he's here. I'm like, be quiet. I'm going to see the real David. Oh my God, I'm so glad I did. I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't get over the height, the beauty, the lighting of this beautiful monolithic structure. I also saw there, I think in the same place, the Galleria. That's where the David was, in the Galleria. The birth of Venus. It was so big. I couldn't believe how big it was and how beautiful. What else have you seen there? What else is there for people that might be,
This is one of my great passions. I mean, it's really the ultimate reason why I actually have stopped off in Florence, Firenze, as they call it in Italian, for 3 or 4 days. And I spent all morning at the Uffizi Gallery, and looking at the spring, the famous Primavera painting by Botticelli, and then of course the Birth of Venus, which is so well known. And they, as you say, they are very, very large paintings, and they're just beautifully painted, at the height of the Renaissance. And I mean, I obviously went back to see its sculpture. I've actually did a lot of recording there today, which I've placed on my Instagram. It's deeply inspirational, and of course, the human being today doesn't have that skill. It just doesn't, to create that type of beauty. And for me, that's very sad. It's still in us. It's in our potentiality, but the system has not supported human beings towards beauty for well over 100 years. I mean, this is definitely going to be one of the things I'm going to be teaching. I've been planning this for a while, is actually going deep into the concept of beauty and what beauty means, because beauty really, when in the final analysis, is connection to divine source. Mathematics, or math as they call it in America, or maths as we call it in Britain, is divine proportion. Math does not lie. And the Fibonacci, all those beautiful harmonics, which of course we see in the astrology, and we see it on the musical with the perfect fifth, the perfect fourth. When you see it in art, when you see it expressed in the paintings of Leonardo da Vinci, which I witnessed 2 or 3 of them today, amazing ones, in the paintings and sculpture of Michelangelo, the paintings of Raphael, the great masters. And then, of course, later with the Mannerist movement, the Correggios, the Caravaggios, the Parmigianos, all these incredible artists that you begin to see, they were able to capture something that was truly harmonic and took you towards some form of veritas, some form of truth, which had an alchemical effect on you, me, the person engaging in the art. That must be brought back into our global civilization again. And that's why people may not be conscious of it when they go to the Louvre or when they go to the Uffizi or any of these great galleries. And of course, Italy is full of them. I mean, the Vatican is whatever one thinks of, the power system there. And here at the Uffizi, of course, it's the palace of the Medicis, the greatest and most powerful family of medieval Europe. They have amassed such a huge fortune of art. It is very powerful to go and see it because it inspires you to say, the ability for human beings to create this is still in us. And the new civilization that we are going to be birthing, these academies will come back in, and human beings will once again be set free to be able to explore. And everyone has a different archetypal truth. Everyone has a different perspective, on how to express their creativity. Some will do it through a painting, others will do it through dance, others will do it through going literally into the cave and writing a beautiful book. A bit like Emily Bronte. She never left her library in 19th century England, and yet she was able to write so beautifully about relationships. The point is, not all, very few human beings have been able to use their creativity to actually sing the joys of life and the connection to source through sensuality, through any form of connection. And I think that's what the art does. It really does allow us to breathe. And sospiro is the Italian word for breath. And that's where the word spirit comes from.
That's beautiful. You mentioned the Medicis, to those with the American Canadian different translation or sound. They would call it Medici, where you and I from Britain, we've been told it's Medici. Same thing. It's like quinoa and quinoa. In Britain, we say quinoa, they say quinoa, but the Medici gallery there, the museum is there, and the Medicis really did influence so many parts of the planet, of the entire planet. They were apparently a banking family, very underhanded stories have come out, but that's a historical, again, kind of look and view. And if we go even further back, the fact that at one point there was this slew of incredible global composers, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Tchaikovsky, and they were all at a similar time in history presenting their amazing symphonies and their arts, and the stories are just so exciting and lovely, and that, thank goodness, has stayed. And then another point, there was the Renaissance, or as the Americans pronounce the Renaissance. And then you had all these Monet, Manet, Degas, Cézanne, Renoir. And my favorite museum to see these is the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. And so if people are looking and listening to George and I, because we're so lucky, we've been raised in Britain, which is a hop and a jump over to Paris, France. You can be in France in 20 minutes, but if you're in London, you can get the Eurostar or the Channel Tunnel under the sea. There you are in Paris or wherever in France. And then the Musée d'Orsay is not open on a Monday. It's so good to know these things. Like Florence is not called Firenze. The Musée d'Orsay, the Museum d'Orsay, is not open on a Monday. But there you can see these beautiful things. And there were these periods of time where this birthing happened, this creativity, this art, the cerveggio of our own souls was birthed in all these levels. And as time has come and the systems that repress or try to repress, taking away music and art and drama and expression in schools, which is a huge failing. And we failed generations like you and I. When we were at school, we had music, we had art, we had drama, and as time's gone on, it was the poorer neighborhoods across the world that were removed of that. That's why the kids in Uganda that we support, we send them, guitars and pianos, and, because that's such an important part of a human spirit, a human body, to have that art, to have that beauty. And that is, as you said, rightly so, even from the scholars, Plato, Socrates, all of them, their writings, their musings, their considering of what the future of humanity is. So much was stopped and blocked and hacked off. But the love of humanity, the love of us, our spirit, is so much stronger. And there is this natural tsunami occurring on all these levels. And people are so excited to explore. And there's a side of them that thinks in the survival mode because that's what they've been programmed into. And I completely understand that. There's this other side, much, much bigger, that's the love and it's the energy and the frequency. Go ahead.
Yeah, because I mean, it's such a huge subject, and to me, it's so fascinating. The age of Pisces, the Christian era from which we are emerging, I mean, it's interesting as we speak that Neptune is at the anaretic degree of Pisces. That's 29 degrees Pisces, soon to move next year and fully by 2026 into Aries. It is really the end of the age of Pisces, I feel, especially as Pluto's moved into Aquarius. We're talking about the new age of Aquarius, the great year, as Plato talked about. It moves backwards. For example, the Roman Empire was the age of Aries, which makes sense. And then we've been in the age of Pisces. What does that mean? We've really had an inverted understanding of the Piscean archetype. We've had a less integrated and a very deceptive, manipulated expression of the Piscean archetype in the last 2,000 years. And there have been times when it was less manipulated. And the Renaissance, one could argue that there was a flourishing then with the city-states in Italy and around Europe. And then something happened, it got shut down again. And much of this information will start to come out, and we will learn more about the real history. You know, again, I always say this, I'm like anyone else. I'm here as a kid trying to understand through truth, my obsession with truth, who we really are, our real ontology, as opposed to the fake history that it's all been forced upon us. And I think with art and coming here, you begin to see just the huge potentiality of art. And actually, many Americans come here. And I've lived in America for 12 years, and I'm very sympathetic and supportive of the American concept. And, you know, Florence is full of Americans, and they are trying their very best to access this part of their nature, which they do not really have access to in America in the way that Europeans do, partly because of the travel and partly just because, apart from, you know, the museums of the Metropolitan Museum and certain museums in Philadelphia and Boston, there's not the art. You know, you could go to Parma, you could go to Venice, you could go to Rome, you could go to even smaller city-states like Pienza has some nice art. You know, there is art all over Europe, and so we take it for granted as Europeans. And I think it's wonderful that, you know, so many Americans can come here, even if, for example, Firenze, Florence is inundated by tourists. I mean, in the Centro Storico, the historic center here, there are hardly any Italians left, if I'm really honest, apart from the ones serving the tourist industry. And it's in that sense, it's become a bit like Disney. But the truth is, the art is here. And what matters most to me is the Uffizi is full, and people are coming, and the deeper they go, the more they're going to get out of it, the more they're going to get inspired then to get home and do their own form of creativity. And that to me gives me great hope for humanity. And this type of art finally is really what it's about. The nonsense of the 20th century of reductionism, of modernism, is really the death knell of beauty. It was done very deliberately through the agencies, the alphabet agencies. I'm not going to go into that now, but understanding who funded Pollock and many of the other Kladinskys and all these people, the money coming in, especially in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, was just grossly manipulated. And of course, there is a great inversion of the age of Pisces, the final nail in the coffin, the anti-beauty, the anti-aesthetic, the brutalism, the ugliness to be celebrated, the excrement to be venerated, is the defilement of humanity. And that's why we still in our souls love to come to places like Venice and Florence, because we can still see the potentiality for human beings to soar.
That's so true. And again, also in Florence, there's so many beautiful things to see, but the Duomo Cathedral, this monolithic architecture that people would link to if they have been looking online, like the element of Tartaria, like a Tartarian-esque, you know, styled or Napolitana. Because again, I myself personally, I had never heard of Tartaria. I don't know where it came from. I'm not happy with any of the descriptions or explanations that anyone gives. I think that there's a whole, again, deleted, like they've redacted books out the Bible, the Vatican have. There's been a deliberate stealing of information so that we can't all put the pieces together. But I was going to say that when you're in Florence or Paris or Greece or somewhere beautiful in Europe, it isn't a fact that, you know, where some of us, I will admit, in the past, I mean, I was such an academic snob. I wanted to read the right books. I wanted to, you know, be able to say, oh yes, Socrates said this and Aristotle said that, yada, yada, yada. You know, and then I grew up in my early 20s and thought, Dani, who are you trying to impress? Who cares? Get a life, girl. And so I've just been observing the academic snobbery from people at their own various levels of understanding self, because we always come back to self once we stop trying to impress others or live vicariously through them. And when someone comes to Europe, let's say, and they've only heard about it, but they get to see Paris, Rome, Italy, Milano, wherever, it isn't so much to me viewing it, because it can be quite shocking how dirty some of the streets are and how crappy some of the housing is, and it's a feeling, it's a soul connection, it's something energetic that goes beyond language, that goes beyond, you know, having to know this or recognizing, oh, that's a painting of John the Baptist, because, you know, there he is with a lamb in the corner, that's one of his signatures or whatever. And again, you mentioned there's art everywhere. Even like I traveled from Provence in France over the Pyrenees into Italy, northern Italy we ended up in, and every little church we stopped at in these tiny little remote villages had just the most amazing works of art. I mean, just, it's
Yeah.
breathtaking, isn't it?
I mean, it is, and I also think it's important to understand, because you mentioned the Duomo, you know, the famous cathedral in Florence, and of course that was redone in the Renaissance period by Brunelleschi. But then there was also that addition to the facade in the 19th century. So, you know, that was not that long ago, and yet that incredible stonemasonry was still extant. It was still able to get that genius as late as the 1800s here in Italy. But, you know, now it's much harder. I think in the last 100+ years, so much of that artisanry has been lost, even in Italy. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. I've just done a big tour of the south of Italy, to Puglia and Campania, and I went to the ancient town of Matera. Matera is the oldest extant town in the whole of Europe. It goes back 10,000 years old. I mean, it's unbelievable, 10,000 years old. And obviously it's a bit of a tourist attraction now, but I was there during a thunderstorm and I was there for a few days and there's hardly anyone there. It's incredible. But you see the South has been depopulated since the Second World War. I mean, one can fully understand when you start reading about the Council of 300 and what the plan was by the globalist agenda to really infiltrate and attack Italy, and to split families up and to get people into the cities and to build nasty buildings on the outskirts of these ancient cities. I mean, there is a dark side to it, and this is true for everywhere, of course. But you know, us tourists, travelers, as I like to describe myself, still come to these ancient heartbeats of Florence and Siena and Venice and Rome, because one is inspired where the beauty is still gathered in the old towns. But you know, the reality is most of the world has been corrupted through bad, poor, ugly architecture. But the good news is that's going to change, because as we lift our ability to see truth, and we begin to step into our creativity, which is our own genius. Everyone's got a different genius, creativity, archetype. Then suddenly humanity is able to create in a way that is very quick. And I see once the new people are in office around the world, which is going to happen sooner than we think, the ability for all of you to be able to step into your creativity and not have to sweat like a slave and work and pay huge taxations to keep you in poverty. Absolutely not. The creativity will come back, and we will have a new renaissance on this planet, which will make the renaissance of medieval Europe in the 15th, 16th century pale in comparison.
Yeah, I believe that. I do. I think these things were set before us on this journey of life and humanity as it evolves and creates, that we would always then pull from, draw from that touches us. That's how we learn. And then the more that we come to understand the, you know, sound, light, frequency, the healing aspects, the water, everything that comes together. And what these giant churches and cathedrals were places of gathering. They weren't to sit and listen to a Bible or a holy book. They were for all manner. They were the hospitals of the day. They were the meeting places. They were the healing temples, and light coming through the stained glass windows again, and sound and causing. I mean, it's so big. It's like, who built the Duomo Cathedral in Florence? Giants, you know, it is beyond comprehension when you're standing in front of it, and the pinks and the greens, and isn't it mind-blowing?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you bring up the conversation of giants, it's been through my mind a lot this time round, coming especially to Florence, where, you know, the last time I was properly here was a long time ago. It was like 6 or 7 years ago. And I was not talking about giants. There's an example of my awakening. It's not that I know for fact, but why are these doors 20 foot tall, some of them? And of course, it makes me go back to that amazing statement by William Blake, who was a great 19th century Brit. The man who never alters his opinion is like standing water and breeds reptiles of the mind.
Goodness.
And actually, it's funny, I've just read David Icke's latest book, The Dream, and that's, I think, the opening credit on his second or third chapter. And I just, wow, of course, that has many, many connotations. The man who never alters his opinion is like standing water, yes, and breeds reptiles of the mind. I mean, reptiles of the mind. I mean, that's really deep, isn't it? I mean, you who runs the Galactic Conference, this is your wheelhouse.
Yeah, we could really dissect that many different ways. But, the first thing I think about, a man that doesn't change his mind, well, you're dumped, mate. What's the point?
Evolution.
What's the
Absolutely.
point? And there are so many people in relationships with people that just do not change their minds. They don't have the capacity. They're not brave enough to consider that they might be wrong about something. How do we grow if we don't consider that we might be wrong about something?
I implore people, I'm so passionate on this. You will find freedom. We will find freedom when we soften, loosen our fixed belief system. Pluto in Aquarius, Pluto transformation, Aquarius fixed belief system. It doesn't matter whether we're a confirmed Catholic or a born-again Christian or an atheist from New York. And let me be really clear, Richard Dawkins taught me this just by observing him. That is as religious, fundamental secularism is to me as abhorrent as fundamental religion, because it has the inability to see another perspective. It has the inability to go through the heart, to have some form of transcendence, some understanding or inner standing of beauty. And so the man who never alters his opinion is like stagnant water, standing water, stagnant water. And that's where reptiles love to be, because it's lower chakra and there's no connection to heart and there's no connection to source. And their source, if there is any connection, is a hive source and an inverted source when it comes to humanity.
And standing water attracts mosquitoes, midges, and gnats, and they all bite. So we're not going there. We're not playing around that pond. Now, you mentioned Richard Dawkins. Now, isn't he the bloke who is completely atheist and just really slams and slanders and defames anyone with any connection to spirituality? Right, moving on from him. David Icke, you mentioned the book, The Dream. Was it great? Was it good? Do you recommend it?
I mean, I love all his stuff. I mean, this book is properly channeled. It's a proper transmission. I'm only on chapter 3, and I think there's 7 chapters. I mean, it literally came out the other day. But yes, but I've read most of his books. I mean, I find this man just right over the target, and he's been at it since 1990. I mean, can you imagine to be that ahead? It's lonely for those who've just been at it for 5 or 6 years, let alone 30 plus.
So lonely. Like him and Alex Collier, to me, are 2 of the bravest men on the planet. And even with David Icke, even if not everything is absolutely correct, that's his perception he's coming from. People don't need to hang their coat and die on the hill, because someone, you don't have to agree with everything they say, but having that open mind, it's like some, religious personnel, they're fine. They can go so far down the journey with us. They can listen, they can get on board with ETs and other life forms. At the minute it gets too close to the core of, but Jesus is Lord and Jesus is King, and they can't let that go. That mantra is so embedded in them. It's so frightening for them. And you and I understand that. We've been on similar journeys ourselves. They cannot let go of that last thing, because then everything is just shattered. And it's all right, because we're realizing, as I was saying yesterday on my channel, we've gone past the point of choosing sides. We've gone past the point of going, am I going to go red pill or blue pill, which I don't know which one, and I don't care. I never bothered. I thought, I'm not falling for that. I'm not falling for that. That's as bad as saying, do you pick Trump or Biden? Go away. Don't bring me into your site, your psyop, we're all coming back here. We're all coming back. What does the individual think? What do they truly think?
I personally, though, never saw the film The Matrix as political. So for me, it was just the blue pill just was a blue pill. It didn't have any party political. So for me, the red pill was just how does one individually and then collectively step into one's own truth and come out of the matrix, out of the programming? And of course, everyone's journey is going to be different. But I totally agree with you also with David Icke and with Alex Collier, two amazing men who I admire tremendously and have learned a great deal from, but I don't agree with everything they say. And there's again where we find our freedom. You know, the true freedom is for the individual to stand in his or her own glory of integrity. And when it's done with love, what more would you want? I love the fact that, Dani, you and I sometimes look at the world a little differently. That's how I grow.
Yeah,
Thank you.
exactly. And thank you too. And you're right, when it says about Alex and, and David Icke and all these people that stand on the front line, giving information, putting information into the field. I don't know enough about the quantum healing systems to be educated in, but I feel off about some of them. I don't know about the quantum financial system, except that I know every single person I've listened to so far doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. And all the dates are like way down the timeline. So I don't believe any of that. That's okay. And like Alex Collier has one thought, I have another. I love that man dearly, desperately. We're allowed to not agree on everything, but then people think, well, that they must be against each other. No, don't be so silly. Don't be so small-minded. Stop making stuff up.
It's interesting that you mentioned, like, for example, let's take cryptocurrencies, because when Pluto moved into Capricorn in late 2008, 2009, that was when the founding of Bitcoin became extant. And here we are now with all these planets building up in Gemini. And actually, when we just had the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction last month, that's when Bitcoin and Ethereum had those ETFs approved, which means that people for the first time can invest more easily in cryptos in the stock market and through also retirement funds. And I find, you see, the astrology quite useful because it's very calm, it's very straight, there's no party political. Okay, you see these trends. And as we move now into Gemini with Jupiter expanding, I think we are going to see an increased push towards the cryptocurrencies, but also an increased push because we're seeing it through BRICS. BRICS is moving away from the dollar. They're creating a new currency backed by silver and gold and crypto. And that started too when Pluto moved into Capricorn. And Pluto has his final push back into Capricorn just before the United States election. It's like clockwork astrology. And just for September and October. So I think we're going to see a big push towards gold and silver as a core ingredient for the global exchange system going forward in the new era. And then there will be a suite, I don't know which ones, of cryptocurrency to support that, because it's easier to exchange through crypto in this digital age as opposed to always carrying gold, which is kind of impossible. It's too much. And silver is too heavy to have too many pieces. So I think we're going to see a nice mixture. And I think the astrology backs it up.
Yeah, so interesting. I remember years ago when all of the crypto coins started coming out, Bitcoin. I was so aware that you got Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and some of the other big knobs, well, my coin's going to win. No, my coin's going to win. And they don't care about us. And this is what people forget. They're just competing against each other. I mean, they're so bored, they have to compete, so then one of them, maybe two of them will get two major, crypto coins. Then it was rockets, Bezos, my rocket's going up. Branson, no, mine is. Elon, I'm the king of all the rockets. So dull, so boring. Yet we get entertained by it. We get excited by it because we believe in these men that we've put, and women, but mostly men that I'm discussing. We put our faith in them. We assume they're going to do something for us, but really the intention is between them, for them, and against them, because they're all competing for the top job or to be the head demon of that particular principality. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, though, is smoke and mirrors, as I'm learning more and more, meaning this is all distraction. And whether, it was originally someone's coin, Musk's coin, or Gates's coin, that really the push has really been about a new world order, one world digital currency, which is totally controlled.
Yes.
And what we can agree on, because anyone who is part of the freedom movement, who believes in the people, believes in humanity, will want to see a devolved system. It's that simple, really, when it comes to the choice. And there is a stark choice as we come into November between a devolved system where the people have choice to choose through freedom, and another one which is going to be a one world tyrannical system where everything's going to be monitored. And when you start to pull back the veneer, you really start to pull back and you understand who's behind the UN, who's behind the World Economic Forum, who's behind. And of course, we're all discovering, you begin to see the Committee of 300, the Council of Rome, the Hoover Institution, the Heritage Foundation, Tavistock, big one, Tavistock, the Council of Foreign Relations, all these things. And then we're going to have to pull back from there. And that's when we get galactic, because that's when we go more into the Draco-Reptilian grey conversation, which is more your wheelhouse than mine. But for me, it's much more about pulling back and peeling that onion to get to the heart, to get to really who has been running the show. And that's part of our awakening, because we're stepping into our power. We don't have to know it all, but we are aware that we've been manipulated. And now we can start from a different perspective, a different power center of creativity.
Yeah, yeah. And again, like discerning is everything. And let's say that, there's somebody very prominent that we've come to love and trust, like an Alex Collier, for example. And they do an interview with somebody who's saying, for example, that pyramids came out of a higher dimension and dropped into the third density. And because the person's saying that absolute nonsense without any proof whatsoever, but that person's with somebody, a real scholar that we love and trust, it's so confusing for people, and it's terrible. And they write a book and they put the book out and people buy the book because they've seen them on that channel. And, again, I wish for everyone to just slow down, listen to everything. Don't get so invested in what you think about the person saying. Take the information and just sit with it, just feel into it, but don't die on the hill for it. Don't fall on the sword for it. It's okay. We're coming to that point, that singular point of self-love, our soul, the soul's journey, the journey of the spirit, the human, the coming together, the Trinity. This is where we are, as a global humanity, but also as an individual, a beautiful individual light. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I do. And I think also that ties in quite nicely with what's going on this month, for your listeners with this Gemini build-up. We have the new moon in Gemini, June 6th. That's a powerful lunation because there's so many new beginnings starting here, not just the one I mentioned before, the Sun-Venus synodic cycle, which is a 9-month cycle. We've also got Jupiter has just moved into Gemini. That's the beginning of a whole new way of communicating. And because Venus is in the mix, it's going to be so much about new relationships. We are going to be forced to, especially with the Saturn making a square later on in this month, a little bit later on, to release some of these old relationships. But when we do, the beautiful new ones are going to come in and they're going to support us. And we want to lean into these opportunities and not we want to take up these opportunities of working with Venus here and the new relationships, new dynamic relationships coming in. So it's a very exciting time. Certainly the next 2 weeks. So later in June, it starts to get a little heavier astrologically with Saturn and some of the other influences, but it's definitely a very dynamic month on the whole.
Yeah, amazing. Now, you mentioned earlier that you put your pictures and your journey of Florence, where you currently are again, on Instagram. Can you tell us what your Instagram address is, please?
Yeah, my Instagram's George H. Lewis. I know there are a couple of fake ones, if you, unfortunately, but that's just the way it is. Everyone goes through that, but you'll find me at the top. And I put actually most of them on my stories, so they only last for 24 hours. But obviously, I put my astrology and other healing stuff on the Instagram. But the best way to really find me is probably through the websites, which is georgehlewis.com, and then my George H. Lewis Academy.com, and that's the exciting thing. I've got some wonderful classes I'm teaching at the moment on 101 astrology, as well as the alchemy of astrology, taking the astrology, showing people how we can really start to alchemize with this language and create our own magic through our own creativity by understanding our natal chart. I've always say this time and time again, that, millionaires, this is the words of JP Morgan, that millionaires never use astrology, but billionaires always do. And the Vatican Church has never stopped using astrology, nor has the City of London. I want people, whether they're religious or not, to fully understand that. Otherwise, they're just being brainwashed. it is a very powerful tool. Yes, it needs to be updated. Some of the archetypes, you know, I mean, talking, for example, to Alex Collier, who's never really particularly given astrology much import. And I know many people who don't, and that's fine. But I think it's a useful tool for many people who are trying to climb out of the cave. And I'm talking about the allegory of the cave here. It gives you a reference point. It gives you it's like a manual as a way to understand the manipulation and to go beyond it. And of course, at a high integrated level, we can go way beyond our astrology and alchemize it, in some ways collapse it and become pure light. But until that time, it's a very useful tool, ladder, if you like, to climb up.
Yeah, perfectly put. Now the spelling of Lewis is Lewes.
No, it's actually Lewis, as in
I knew
Lewis.
that. I knew that. I just flipped it round in my mind. I mean, I've only written it 1,000 times and I've only known you for
No, but it's okay because that is an old Welsh,
point.
it's an old Welsh Scottish way. I mean, you know, pre-Shakespeare. I mean, even at the time of Shakespeare, he spelt so many things phonetically. I mean, I think English is such an ancient language, and of course, it's been so manipulated, and we've talked about that in other sessions. But you can spell things in many different ways in English. I don't really get caught up on that. If someone wants to spell it Lewes as opposed to is, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you know. But yeah, on the website, it's Lewis.
IS, as in is at the end, not
Yeah.
S.
Yeah.
It's Lewis. Just so it's important, especially because there are some clone accounts of you out there. So, and I love your George H. Lewis Academy. And it's great that people can know they can work with you directly and independently or in group sessions. Also, I had you and your lovely friend from Bosnia on recently. Let's have a catch up quickly on the dates of that. It hasn't happened yet. It's happening this month, right? June.
Absolutely. It's coming. The Bosnian retreat is starting on the 16th of June. So in about, 10 days time. And it's going to be 5-6 days at the Bosnian pyramids. And we're going to meet up with Dr. Sam and we're going to do some activations in the Sun Pyramid and some of the tunnels next door to some of the pyramids. It's going to be very, very exciting to journey there. I've been to Bosnia, but I've never been to these pyramids. So I'm very excited to go with obviously people who really know the area very well.
That's
And
amazing.
there are a few spots left, I think.
And you're starting in Croatia.
Yeah, we're starting in Croatia in about 5 days. There's 2 parts to the trip. We've got a 5-day pre-Croatia, and then the actual heavy duty is in Bosnia at the pyramids. Yeah. And we're also going to Sarajevo and Mostar and Medjugorje, which is that place of pilgrimage, which is just exquisite. I went there 20 years ago. It's a bit like Lourdes. It's very, very magical, actually.
Yeah. I know a young lady who just did that walk and she's in her early 20s. So it's amazing the different stages that people are on their soul journey, what they're drawn to on these pilgrimages. So brilliant. Well, George, it's always lovely to have you. Important, I feel, always to have you. You bring the light, the joy, and you just bring a little bit of class to my. So any final words directly to the audience, my love?
Just embrace this Venus new synodic cycle of getting into some really lovely new relationships of all sorts, friendships, reigniting relationships which need to be reignited, but also releasing the ones that no longer serve you. Be brave and stay in joy.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, George, so much. We'll see you next month and can't wait to hear how the Bosnian Croatian tour goes, how your new George H. Lewis IS Academy continues to grow, and anything else that we can do to support you and to help you guys out there. And to you guys out there, thank you for being here with George and I again, sending love to your heart from mine and George's, and we'll see you soon.